Okay, this is part 65 of Nos4a2. The lake. Vic breaststroked into the shallows, then crawled the last few feet up onto the beach. There she rolled onto her back, legs still in the lake. She shook furiously in fierce, almost crippling spasms, and made sounds too angry to be sobs. She might have been crying. She wasn't sure. Her insides hurt badly, as if she had spent a day and a night vomiting. In a kidnapping, nothing is more important than what happens in the first 30 minutes, Vic thought, her mind replaying something she had once heard on TV. Vic did not think what she did in the next 30 minutes mattered at all, did not think any cop anywhere had the power to find Charlie Mannix and the Wraith. Still, she shoved herself to her feet because she needed to do what she could, whether it made a difference or not. She walked like a drunk in a hard crosswind, swaying, following a wandering path to the back door, which is where she fell again. She went up the steps on hands and knees, used the railing to get to her feet. The phone began to ring. Vic forced herself onward through another burst of lancing pain, sharp enough to drive the breath out of her. She reeled through the kitchen, reached the phone, caught it on the third ring just before it could go to voicemail. "I need help," Vic said. "Who is this? You have to help me. Someone took my son." "Ah, it's okay, Miss McQueen," said the little girl on the other end of the line. "Daddy will drive safe and make sure Wayne has a real good time. He'll be here with us soon. He'll be here in Christmasland, and we'll show him all our games. Isn't that fine?" Vic hit end call, then dialed 911. A woman told her she had reached emergency services. Her voice was calmly detached. "What's your name and the nature of your emergency?" "Victoria McQueen. I've been attacked. A man has kidnapped my son. I can describe the car. They only just drove away. Please send someone." The dispatcher tried to keep the same tone of steady calm but couldn't quite manage it. Adrenaline changed everything. "How badly are you hurt?" "Forget that. Let's talk about the kidnapper. His name is Charles Talent Mannix. He's, I don't know, old." "Dead," Vic thought but didn't say. "In his 70s. He's over 6 feet tall, balding, about 200 pounds. There's another man with him, someone younger. I didn't see him too well." Because he was wearing a fucking gas mask for some reason. But she didn't say that either. "They're in a Rolls-Royce Wraith, a classic, 1930s. My son is in the back seat. My son is 12. His name is Bruce, but he doesn't like that name." And Vic began to cry. Couldn't help it. "He has black hair and is 5 feet tall and was wearing a tight white t-shirt with nothing on it." "Victoria, the police are en route. Was either of these men armed?" "Yes, the younger one has a gun, and Mannix has some kind of hammer. He hit me with it a couple times." "I'm dispatching an ambulance to see your injuries. Did you happen to get the license plate?" "It's a fucking Rolls-Royce from the 30s with my little boy in the back. How many of those do you think are driving around?" Her voice snagged on a sob. She coughed it up and coughed up the license plate tag as well. Nos4a2. It's a vanity plate. Spells a German word. Nos4a2. What's it mean? "What's it matter? Look it the fuck up!" "I'm sorry. I understand you're upset. We're sending out an alert now. We're going to do everything we can to get your son back. I know you're scared. Be calm. Please try to be calm." Vic had a sense that the dispatcher was half talking to herself. There was a wavering tone in her voice, like the woman was struggling not to cry. "Help is on the way, Victoria." "Just Vic, thank you. I'm sorry I swore at you." "It's all right. Don't worry about it." "Vic, if they're in a distinctive car like a Rolls-Royce, that's good. That will stand out. They aren't going to get far in a vehicle like that. If they're anywhere on the road, someone will see them." But no one did. When the EMTs tried to escort her to the ambulance, Vic elbowed free from them, told them to keep their fucking hands off. A police officer, a small portly Indian woman, inserted herself between Vic and the men. "You can examine her here," she said, leading Vic back to the couch. Her voice carried the lightest of accents, a lilt that made every statement sound both vaguely musical and like a question. "Is it better if she doesn't go? What if the kidnapper calls?" Vic huddled on the couch in her wet cutoffs, wrapped in a throw. An EMT wearing blue gloves planted himself next to her and asked her to drop the blanket and remove her shirt. That got the attention of the cops in the room, who cast surreptitious glances Vic's way, but Vic complied wordlessly without a second thought. She slopped her wet shirt on the floor. She wasn't wearing a bra, and she covered her breasts with one arm, hunching forward to let the EMTs look at her back. The EMT inhaled sharply. The Indian police officer, her name tag read Citra, stood on Vic's other side, looking down at the curve of Vic's back. She made a sound herself, a soft cry of sympathy. "I thought you said he tried to run you over," Citra said. "You did not say he succeeded." "She's going to have to sign a form," said the EMT. "A thing that says she refused to get in the ambulance. I need to cover my ass here. She could have cracked ribs or a popped spleen and I could miss it. I want it on record that I don't believe treating her here is in her best medical interest." "Maybe it's not in my best medical interest," Vic said, "but it is in yours." Vic heard a sound go around the room, not quite laughter, but close to it, a low male ripple of mirth. There were, by now, 6 or 7 of them in the room, standing around pretending not to look at her chest, the tattoo of a V6 engine set above her breasts. A cop sat on the other side of her, the first cop she had seen who wasn't in uniform. He wore a blue blazer that was too short at the wrists, a red tie with a coffee stain on it, and a face that would have won an ugly contest walking by. Bushy white eyebrows turning yellow at the tips, nicotine-stained teeth, a comically gourd-like nose, a jutting cleft chin. He dug in one pocket, then another, then lifted his wide, flat rear and found a reporter's notebook in his back pocket. He opened it, then stared at the pad with a look of utter bafflement, as if he had been asked to write a 500-word essay on impressionist painting. It was that blank look, more than anything else, that let Vic know that he wasn't the guy. He was a placeholder, the person who would matter, the one who would be handling the search for her son, who would coordinate resources and compile information, wasn't here yet. She answered his questions anyway. He started in the right place with Wayne's age, height, weight, what he'd been wearing, if she had a recent photo. At some point, Citra walked away, then returned with an oversized hoodie that said NH State Police on the front. Vic tugged it on. It came to her knees. "The father?" asked the ugly man, whose name was Daltrey. "Lives in Colorado." "Divorced?" "Never married." "How's he feel about you having custody of the kid?" "I don't have custody. Wayne is just... We're on good terms about our son. It's not an issue." "Got a number where we can reach him?" "Yes, but he's on a plane right now. He visited for the 4th. He's headed back this evening." "You sure about that? How do you know he boarded the plane?" "I'm sure he had nothing to do with this, if that's what you're asking. We're not fighting over our son. My ex is the most harmless and easygoing man you've ever met." "Oh, I don't know. I've met some pretty easygoing fellas. I know a guy up in Maine who leads a Buddhist-themed therapy group, teaches people about managing their temper and addictions through transcendental meditation. The only time this guy ever lost his composure was the day his wife served him with a restraining order. First he lost his zen, then he lost 2 bullets in the back of her head. But that Buddhist-themed therapy group he runs sure is popular on his cell block in Shawshank. A lot of guys with anger management issues in there." "Lou didn't have anything to do with this. I told you, I know who took my son." Okay, I have to ask this stuff. Tell me about the guy who worked on your back. No, wait. Tell me about his car first." She told him. Daltrey shook his head and made a sound that could have been a laugh if it expressed any humor. Mostly what it expressed was incredulity. "Your man ain't too bright. If he's on the road, I give him less than half an hour." "Before what?" "Before he's face down in the frecking dirt with some state cop's boot on his neck. You don't grab a kid in an antique car and drive away. That's about as smart as driving an ice cream truck. Kind of stands out. People look. Everyone is going to notice a period Rolls Royce." "It isn't going to stand out." "What do you mean?" he asked. She didn't know what she meant, so she didn't say anything. Daltrey said, "And you recognize one of your assailants? This would be Charles Mannix," looking at something he had scribbled in his notepad. "How would you know him?" He kidnapped me when I was 17 years old. He held me for 2 days. That quieted the room. Look it up, she said. It's in his file. Charles Talent Mannix. And he is pretty good at not getting caught. I have to change out of these wet shorts and into some sweats. I'd like to do that in my bedroom if you don't mind. I feel like Mom had flashed enough skin for one day. Vic held in her mind her one last glimpse of Wayne, trapped in the backseat of the Rolls. She saw him swatting a hand at the air. Go on, get away. As if he were angry with her. He had already looked as pale as any corpse. She saw Wayne in flashes, and it was like the hammer thudding into her again, walloping her in the chest instead of the back. Here he was sitting naked in a sandbox, behind their townhouse in Denver, a chubby 3-year-old with a thatch of black hair, using a plastic shovel to bury a plastic telephone. Here he was on Christmas Day in rehab, sitting on the cracked and crinkly plastic surface of a couch, plucking at a wrapped gift, then tearing the wrapping away to show the white boxed iPhone. Here he was walking out onto the dock with a toolbox that was too heavy for him. Bang! Each vision of him hit her, and her bruised insides clenched up again. Bang! He was a baby, sleeping naked on her naked breast. Bang! He was kneeling in the gravel next to her, arms greasy to the elbows, helping her to thread the motorcycle chain back into its sprockets. Sometimes the pain was too intense, so pure, the room darkened at the edges of her vision, and she felt faint. At some point she had to move, couldn't stay on the couch anymore. If anyone is hungry, I can make something to eat, she said. It was almost 9:30 in the evening by then. I've got a full fridge. We'll send out for something, Daltrey said. Don't trouble yourself. They had the TV on, turned to NECN, New England Cable News. They had gone up with the alert about Wayne an hour before. Vic had seen it twice and knew she couldn't watch it again. First, they would show the photo she had given them of Wayne in an Aerosmith t-shirt and an avalanche wool cap, squinting into bright spring sunlight. She already regretted it, didn't like how the cap hid his black hair and made his ears stick out. This would be followed by a photograph of Vic herself, the one from the search engine website. She assumed they were showing that one to get a pretty girl on the screen. She was wearing makeup and a black t-shirt and cowboy boots, and had her head tipped back to laugh. A jarring image considering the situation. They didn't show Mannix. They didn't even say his name. They described the kidnappers as 2 white males in an antique black Rolls Royce. Why don't they tell people who they're looking for? Vic asked the first time she saw the report. Daltrey shrugged, said he would find out, got off the couch and wandered into the yard to talk to some other men. When he came back in, though, he didn't offer any new information, and when the report ran the second time, they were still looking for 2 white males out of the approximately 14 million white males to be found in New England. If she saw the report a third time and there wasn't a picture of Charlie Mannix, if they didn't say his name, she thought she might put a chair through the TV. Please, Vic said now. I've got some slaw and cold ham, a whole loaf of bread. I could lay out sandwiches. Daltrey shifted in his seat and looked uncertainly at some of the other policemen in the room, torn between hunger and decency. Officer Citra said, I think you should. Of course. I'll come with you. It was a relief to get out of the living room, which was too crowded with bodies, cops coming and going, walkie-talkies squawking continuously. She stopped to take in the view of the lawn through the open front door. In the glare of the spotlights, it was brighter in the yard at night than it had been in the midday fog. She saw the toppled fence rails and a man in rubber gloves measuring the tire treads imprinted in the soft loam. The cop cars were flashing their strobes as if at the scene of an emergency, and never mind that the emergency had driven away hours before. Wayne strobed in her mind just like that, and for a moment she felt dangerously lightheaded. Citra saw her sag and took her elbow, helped her the rest of the way into the kitchen. It was better in there. They had the room to themselves. The kitchen windows looked out on the dock and the lake. The dock was lit up by more of those big tripod-mounted spotlights. A cop with a flashlight had waded into the water up to his thighs, but she couldn't tell to what purpose. A plainclothesman watched from the end of the dock, pointing and giving directions. A boat floated 40 feet offshore. A boy stood in the front end next to a dog, staring at the cops, the lights, the house. When Vic saw the dog, she remembered Hooper. She had not thought of him once since seeing the headlights of the Wraith in the mist. "Someone needs to go look for the dog," Vic said. "He must be outside somewhere." She had to stop every few words to catch her breath. Citra looked at her with great sensitivity. "Do not worry about the dog now, Mrs. McQueen. Have you had any water? It is important to hydrate yourself." "I'm surprised he isn't barking his head off," Vic said, "with all this commotion." Citra ran a hand down Vic's arm once and again, then squeezed Vic's elbow. Vic looked at the policewoman in sudden understanding. "You had so much else to worry about," Citra said. "Oh, God," Vic said, and began to cry again, her whole body shaking. "No one wanted to upset you even more." She rocked, holding herself, crying in a way she hadn't since those first days after her father left her and her mother. Vic had to lean on the counter for a while, wasn't sure her legs had the strength to continue to support her. Citra reached over and tentatively rubbed her back. "Shh," said Vic's mother, dead for 2 months. "Just breathe, Vicky. Just breathe for me." She said it in a light Indian accent, but Vic recognized her mother's voice all the same. Recognized the feel of her mother's hand on her back. Everyone you lost was still there with you, and so maybe no one was ever lost at all, unless they went with Charlie Mannix. In a while, Vic sat down and drank a glass of water. She drained the whole thing in 5 swallows without stopping for air, was desperate for it. It was lukewarm and sweet and good and tasted of the lake. Citra opened cupboards looking for paper plates. Vic got up and, over the other woman's objections, began to help with sandwiches. She made a row of paper plates and put 2 pieces of white bread on each, tears dripping off her nose and falling on the bread. She hoped Wayne didn't know Hooper was dead. She thought sometimes that Wayne was closer to Hooper than he was to either her or Lou. Vic found the ham, coleslaw, and a bag of Doritos and began to make up the plates. "There's a secret to cop sandwiches," said a woman who had come in behind her. Vic took one look and knew this was the guy she had been waiting for, even if the guy wasn't a guy. This woman had frizzy brown hair and a little snub nose. She was plain at first glance, devastatingly pretty on the second. She wore a tweed coat with corduroy patches on the elbows and blue jeans, and could have passed for a grad student at a liberal arts college, if not for the 9mm strapped under her left arm. "What's the secret?" Vic asked. "Show you," she said, and eased herself in, took the spoon, and dumped coleslaw into one of the sandwiches on top of the ham. She built a roof of Doritos over the coleslaw, squirted Dijon mustard on the chips, buttered a slice of bread, and squished it all together. "The butter is the important part. Works like glue, right?" "Yes, and cops are, by nature, cholesterol magnets." "I thought the FBI only came in on kidnappings in cases where the kid had been hauled across state lines," Vic said. The frizzy-haired woman frowned, then glanced down at the laminated card clipped to the breast of her jacket, the one that said, "FBI, Psych Eval, Tabitha K. Hutter," over an unsmiling photograph of her face. "Technically, we're not in it yet," Hutter said. "But you're 40 minutes from 3 state borders and less than 2 hours from Canada. Your assailants have had your son for almost—" "My assailants?" Vic said. She felt a flush of heat in her cheeks. Why do people keep talking about my assailants like we don't know anything about them? It's starting to piss me off. Charlie Mannix is the man. Charlie Mannix and someone else are driving around with my kid." "Charles Mannix is dead, Mrs. McQueen. He's been dead since May." "Got a body?" That gave Hutter pause. She pursed her lips, said, "He has a death certificate. There were photos of him in the morgue. He was autopsied. His chest was split open. The coroner took his heart out and weighed it. Those are convincing reasons to believe he didn't attack you." "And I've got 6 reasons to believe he did," Vic said. "They're all up and down my back. You want me to take my shirt off and show you the bruises? Every other cop in this joint has had a good look." Hutter stared at her without reply. Her gaze held the simple curiosity of a small child. It rattled Vic to be observed so intently. So few adults gave themselves permission to stare that way. At last Hutter shifted her eyes, turned her gaze toward the kitchen table. "Will you sit with me?" Without waiting for an answer, she picked up a leather satchel she'd brought with her and settled at the kitchen table. She peered up expectantly, waiting for Vic to sit with her. Vic looked to Chitra as if for advice, remembering how the woman had, for a moment, comforted her and whispered to her like her mother. But the policewoman was finishing the sandwiches and bustling them out. Vic sat. Hutter removed an iPad from her briefcase, and the screen glowed. More than ever, she looked like a grad student, one preparing a dissertation on the Bronte sisters, perhaps. She passed her finger over the glass, swiping through some sort of digital file, then looked up. At his last medical exam, Charlie Mannix was listed at approximately 85 years old. "You think he's too old to have done what he did?" Vic asked. "I think he's too dead, but tell me what happened, and I'll try to get my head around it." Vic did not complain that she had already told the story 3 times start to finish. The other times didn't count because this was the first cop who mattered. If any cop mattered. Vic was not sure one did. Charlie Mannix had been claiming lives for a long time and had never been caught, passed through the nets that law enforcement threw at him like silver smoke. How many children had climbed into his car and never been seen again? "Hundreds," came the answer, a whisper of a thought. Vic told her story, the parts of it she felt she could tell. She left out Maggie Lee. She did not mention she had ridden her motorcycle onto an impossible covered bridge of the imagination shortly before Charlie Mannix tried to run her down. She did not discuss the psychotropic medication she did not take anymore. When Vic got to the part about Mannix hitting her with the hammer, Hutter frowned. She asked Vic to describe the hammer in detail, tapping the keyboard on her iPad screen. She stopped Vic again when Vic told her about how she had gotten up off the ground and gone after Mannix with the tap-it key. "Tapper what?" "Tap-it key," Vic said. "Triumph made them special for their bikes. It's a spanner, kind of wrench. I was working on the motorcycle and had it in my pocket." "Where is it now?" "I don't know. I had it in my hand when I had to run. I was probably still holding it when I went in the lake." "This is when the other man started shooting at you. Tell me about that," she told. "He shot Mannix in the face?" Hutter said. "It wasn't like that. He clipped him in the ear." "Vic, I want you to help me think this through. This man, Charlie Mannix, we agree he was probably 85 years old at the time of his last medical exam. He spent 10 years in a coma. Most coma patients require months of rehabilitation before they can walk again. You are telling me you cut him with this tapper key, tap it, and then he was shot, but still had the strength to drive away." What Vic could not say was that Mannix wasn't like other men. She had felt it when he swung the hammer, a coiled strength that belayed his advanced age and gaunt frame. Hutter insisted that Mannix had been opened up, that his heart had been removed during the autopsy, and Vic didn't doubt it. For a man who'd had his heart taken out and put back in, a nick in the ear wasn't that big a deal. Instead, she said, "Maybe the other guy drove. You want me to explain it? I can't. I can only tell you what happened. What is your point? Mannix has got my 12-year-old son in his car, and he's going to kill him to get even with me. But for some reason, we're discussing the limits of your FBI imagination. Why is that?" She looked in Hutter's face, into Hutter's bland, calm eyes, and understood. "Jesus, you don't believe a fucking word, do you?" Hutter deliberated for a time, and when she spoke, Vic had a sense that she was choosing words carefully. "I believe that your boy is missing, and I believe you've been hurt. I believe that you're in hell right now. Other than that, I'm keeping my mind open. I hope you'll see that as an asset and work with me. We both want the same thing. We want your boy back safe. If I thought it would help, I'd be out there driving around looking for him. But that's not how I find the bad guys. I find them by collecting information and sorting out what's useful from what isn't. Really, it's not so different from your books, the search engine stories." "You know them? How young are you?" Hutter smiled slightly. "Not that young. It's in your file. Also, an instructor at Quantico uses pictures from search engine in his lectures to show how hard it is to pick out relevant details in a clutter of visual information." "What else is in my file?" Hutter's smile faltered slightly. Her gaze did not. That you were found guilty of arson in Colorado in 2009, that you spent a month in a Colorado mental hospital where you were diagnosed with severe PTSD and schizophrenia. You take antipsychotics and have a history of alcohol. Jesus, you think I hallucinated getting the shit kicked out of me? Vic said, her stomach clenching. You think I hallucinated getting shot at? We have yet to confirm a shooting took place. Vic pushed back in her chair. He fired at me. He fired 6 bullets, emptied his gun. Thinking now. Her back had been to the lake. It was possible every single bullet, even the one that had gone through Mannix's ear, had wound up in the water. We're still looking for slugs. My bruises, Vic said. I don't doubt someone fought you, said the FBI agent. I don't think anyone doubts that. There was something about this statement, some dangerous implication that Vic couldn't figure out. Who would have fought her if not Mannix? But Vic was too exhausted, too emotionally spent to try to make sense out of it. She didn't have it in her to work out whatever Hutter was stepping around. Vic looked at Hutter's laminated badge again. Psych eval. Wait a minute. Wait a fucking minute. You're not a detective. You're a doctor. Why don't we look at some pictures? Hutter said. No, Vic said. That's a complete waste of time. I don't need to look at mugshots. I told you, one of them was wearing a gas mask. The other was Charlie Mannix. I know what Charlie Mannix looks like. Jesus, why the fuck am I talking to a doctor? I want to talk to a detective. I wasn't going to ask you to look at pictures of criminals, Hutter said. I was going to ask you to look at pictures of hammers. It was such a baffling, unexpected thing to hear that Vic just sat there, mouth open, unable to make a sound. Before anything came to her, there was a commotion in the other room. Citra's voice rose, wavering and querulous, and Daltrey said something, and then there was a third voice, Midwestern and emotional. Vic recognized the third voice at once, but couldn't work out what it was doing in her house when it ought to be on a plane, if not in Denver by now. Her confusion delayed her reaction time so that she was not all the way out of her chair when Lou came in the room trailing an entourage of cops. He hardly looked like himself. His face was ashy and his eyes stood out in his big, round face. He looked like he had lost 10 pounds since Vic had last seen him 2 days earlier. She rose and reached for him, and in the same moment he enfolded her in his arms. "What are we going to do?" Lou asked her. "What the hell are we going to do now, Vic?"